What is up, guys, and welcome back to Above the Middle, the place where we talk about all things personal development with me, Joe Gibson. Now this week we are talking about anxiety management. I'm going to walk you through 5 things to remember in order for you to start changing your relationship with your anxiety so that you are not walking around being controlled and ruled by this fear of maybe failing or embarrassment or whatever that anxiety might be saying to you. Now these 5 things are 5 things which I have to remind myself of on a day-to-day basis. And just a disclaimer, this is not a video that is going to tell you that you can get rid of your anxiety in a day. Anxiety is just a natural process in your brain and we cannot get rid of it, but we can begin to change our relationship with it and decrease it over time. That is what we are aiming to do here. I cannot tell you the way to completely get rid of your anxiety because, as I said, it's not possible. So just understand that and accept that you might have a lot of anxiety right now, but we can begin right here today to start changing that for you. Changing your relationship with your anxiety through these 5 tips, and from that, decreasing it over time. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. Tip number 1, it's just expanding your knowledge on anxiety. So the example that I like to use for this is if you want to go get your computer fixed, you're not going to go to a stranger on the street who knows absolutely nothing about computers and ask him to fix your computer. He's going to look at you and be like, well, how the hell am I supposed to fix this? I don't have any knowledge on fixing computers. Why are you giving this to me? You would go to a computer store with a professional who'd be able to fix it for you. We have to treat our mental health the same. We cannot begin to treat our own anxiety without first having a basic understanding of how it works and what its relationship is to you. So saying that, I highly recommend that you go away and you research into where it came from and where it comes from in the brain, just to start painting that picture of that anxiety in order to treat it. It's the same thing with any doctor who wants to perform surgery. Of course he needs to know about anatomy to figure out how to perform the surgery successfully. We have to treat it the same way with our mental health. Really dig into neurology. This is where I have managed to make such leaps with my anxiety, is understanding the neurological basis to a lot of these functions in my brain, because then it just makes things so much easier. So many of us are just walking around in our day-to-day lives being like, I have no idea what is going on inside my head. And just understanding the way the brain works and the functions of the brain and how different structures work with each other, it does wonders for you because you can start to kind of see things a bit more clearly. So for an example, anxiety comes from the amygdala in your brain. It's a fear-based response system. So every time anxiety comes up for me, I can just acknowledge that as being this response in this part of my brain. And that immediately makes things a bit clearer for me than just walking around being like, I'm feeling anxious right now, I don't know why, where's it coming from? I can pinpoint it in my brain. It makes things clearer. We can start to work from there. So really go away, listen to podcasts. I might have some videos which apply to this. Other YouTubers definitely will. Read some books. Whatever you need to do, expand that knowledge in order to start working from there. To add to this, we really want to start developing a sense of understanding as to what sort of anxiety you're dealing with. So is it social anxiety? Is it OCD? Is it panic disorders? Is it relationship anxiety? Is it just generalized anxiety? Investigate why that anxiety is there, because again, we're just painting that picture for ourselves in order to build this understanding of where anxiety is coming from and how it's applying to you, so we can start from there and then work with it. So that is tip number 1, just expanding your knowledge on anxiety. Tip number 2, understanding that it is a process. So I mentioned it at the start, but just to go through it in a bit more detail, this is a process. Unfortunately, things like this do not just resolve themselves in a day. It takes time and it takes effort and it takes commitment. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It's just something you have to commit to. Even when you're feeling like not doing the work, do it anyway. When you're feeling like you don't want to meditate, get up and meditate anyway. Your brain is conditioned to stop you from doing things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable. So a lot of anxiety management work is probably going to bring up a lot of uncomfortable feelings for you. And your brain as a result is going to tell you to not do that stuff and just procrastinate, but really just fight through it. Starting out, it's going to be uncomfortable. I cannot deny that. And this is where support comes in really handy for you guys. You can seek support from friends or family or a therapist. Wherever you can find the support, take it, because at the start it can be really intense. Those thoughts and those feelings can bring out a really big reaction in you, but just understand when you start to overcome them, it gets so much easier for you. You start to build that self-confidence and courage within yourself to say, hey, I'm actually doing this. I'm starting to overcome these anxieties. And then it's just progress from there. It's just getting out that gate that we have to do. Just putting one foot in front of the other when it feels like you don't want to, and just going for it. It does get so much easier with time. So that's number 2, just understanding that this is indeed a process and that you can do it. The results will come, just stay committed. Number 3, and this is where we're going to go a bit deeper, guys, but this one was the game changer for me in changing my relationship with my anxiety. And that is understanding that you are not your thoughts. We cannot go through our day-to-day life every day assuming that every single anxious thought that comes into our brain is a true reflection on who we are as a person. If you are doing that, like I did for a very long time, we are just causing ourselves unnecessary suffering. You have to understand that there is a difference between you as a person, your soul and your essence, and the thoughts that are coming up. The example that I'll use for this is, you probably heard it before, but the blue sky example. So you have your blue sky and you have your clouds. You as a person, your soul, your essence, you are that blue sky. The clouds which are coming and going are merely just the thoughts. You don't have control over when they are coming or going, but they are a separate entity from you as a person. Those clouds and that sky, they're not the same thing. They're two different things. Really understand that. And this is where meditation comes in brilliantly, because you'll begin to develop this concept of being the observer of your thoughts. To sit back and understand that your thoughts are just automatic things coming and going through your brain. They're not a true reflection on who you are. And here's how I think about it. So when I have anxious thoughts, I simply just remember that, oh, these anxious thoughts are just thoughts that are coming up from the amygdala in my brain. They aren't a reflection on who I am. They're just that part of my brain taking maybe past circumstances and my environment at the moment to cause this worry within me, which comes up as anxious thoughts. That isn't who I am. That is just that part of my brain being a bit oversensitive to my environment. When you start to distinguish those two, that's where true change starts to come, because you no longer go through your day-to-day life being rolled and rocked about by whatever thought comes into your head. So Eckhart Tolle, if you've ever read The Power of Now, which I highly recommend for anxiety management and just understanding the concept of yourself and thoughts, he says that our thoughts are not the cause of our unhappiness. It is in fact how we identify with those thoughts. So it doesn't matter what thought comes into your head. The only thing that is causing you suffering is how you are choosing to identify with that thought that comes up. And what is the case for many of us is that these anxious thoughts are very much irrational thinking. There is not a true basis to a lot of these anxious thoughts. Even though your brain might be highly sensitive and telling you that there is harm there, doesn't mean there is actually harm there. So there's a lot to get into there, but you can develop this awareness through meditation. Highly recommend you read up on this subject, because it is a game changer when you stop identifying with your thoughts. That is tip number 3. So let's move on to tip number 4. And tip number 4, stopping the arguing with yourself. As I said before, these thoughts are automatic. You do not have control over when they're coming up or when they are going away. What we need to not do is start getting so frustrated that the thoughts are there in the first place, because we don't have control over them. Your amygdala is part of your emotional brain. It's hooked up to your memory center. So that means if you're in certain situations that have given you anxiety before, this part of your brain is going to go off automatically and be like, oh no, we're in a similar situation here. Anxiety is going to flare up. You do not have any control over when that anxiety is going to come up. It's just going to come up. And that is probably one of the worst things for a lot of people. It's just that uncontrollable nature of anxiety. We cannot get annoyed and frustrated that anxiety has come up again. I used to spend so much time just mulling over the fact that I was having negative thoughts. I would sit there and I'd get so frustrated, being like, why can't I just stop thinking about this thing? And all I was doing then was adding fuel to the fire, and that stuff just stayed in my head. We cannot fight anxiety with more thinking. It's just not possible. Anxiety is coming up from that amygdala in your emotional brain, and then your prefrontal cortex, which is here at the front. Basic function of that is to look over the rest of your brain, so look over that anxiety and say, right, do I need to be actually reacting to this anxiety right now? Is this anxiety something that I should be taking seriously, or is it not? It's like the logic and reasoning part of your brain. What happens when we get caught up in these arguments with ourselves? This part of the brain is looking at your anxiety and it's going, you are stupid. What are you doing there? You do not need to be there. This is all irrational. But then the anxiety part of your brain is going back and being like, no, there is a reason. There is a reason you should be worried. And it's just a back and forth that eventually the anxiety just wins. And why does it win? Because this prefrontal cortex came up much later in our evolution than the emotional part of our brain, where anxiety comes from. So this part of the brain right here is much, much weaker than the part where anxiety comes from. So it's like a losing battle from the get-go. You cannot fight your anxiety with just fighting back with more thinking. It does not work. It is a waste of time. It is a waste of effort. You'll just end up getting worked up, upset, frustrated, and all you're doing then in that situation is just giving yourself more reason to get worked up the next time you're in that situation, because you're telling yourself, every time I am in these situations, I'm going to have a massive reaction, which causes more anxiety. So it's a negative loop which we can't be in. And trust me, I spent so much time in that mindset. I spent so much time fighting with myself, and I never won. I never won that battle. I just caused myself harm along the way. So that is number 4, just stopping the fighting with ourselves. And that moves us on to our 5th and final tip. So you're probably wondering, well Joe, if I can't fight with my anxiety, if I can't overpower it with logical thinking, then what can I possibly do? What we have to do is we just have to surrender and let the anxiety be there. Just imagine yourself as the ocean, and the anxiety are just waves coming up and going down. If we just sit back and we accept that anxiety is going to be there, and we don't fight against it, those waves are going to come up, and then after a little bit of time, they're going to go down. Because once again, a lot of our fears are irrational. So that wave is going to come up, and then that part of your brain's going to think, oh wait, I don't need to be so irrational about this. This situation isn't actually going to cause me harm. And then that wave's just going to start coming down. And that's going to happen time after time after time. If we approach that wave, we see that anxiety come up, and then we start smacking it, being like, get away, why is this anxiety here? I don't want it to be here. What's going to happen? You're just going to start splashing that wave. You're going to get salt water in your mouth and up your nose. It's going to be really uncomfortable, and you've made the situation 10 times worse. We just have to sit back, continue what you were going to do anyway, because what we are doing then is we're just teaching our brain that when we are in these situations, there is no reason to avoid it. And you're just sending that message back to your head that in future situations, that anxiety doesn't need to be so high. And that right there is how we start to treat anxiety. That is how your anxiety is going to decrease over time. It's through exposure to that anxiety. Maybe there's going to be massive waves when you start out. And again, this is where support is brilliant, and I highly recommend it. I'm not telling you that this is easy, that you can just face your fears and it's all going to be okay. It might be really uncomfortable, but I truly believe that is how we start to overcome our anxieties, is through facing it. When we avoid our anxieties, when we avoid situations that make us anxious, all you are doing then is telling yourself that there is a reason to be afraid, that something bad could happen. And all that's going to happen then is your anxiety is going to be even stronger the next time. So you have to look at those anxious situations with the understanding the anxiety is going to be there, that waves are going to come up, but they're going to go down. And trust me, they do. They really, really do. I can wholeheartedly say that these 5 things are the things which have allowed me to overcome a lot of my anxieties and get to a point today where I can speak on camera and be confident about it, and look at myself and be confident in my ability to do this sort of stuff. So that is where we're going to finish off today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, hopefully you can take something from this. I will see you guys next Wednesday for another video. Check out my blog where I talk about this stuff in a little bit more detail. Subscribe, and I will see you guys next week.